and gentlemen. I start with welcome, dear Nadia Bartels, everybody know her. Dear Sergei Tchoban, he arrives in 5 minutes. Dear protagonist of this afternoon, Christina Garcia, welcome. Neil Bingham, Michael Rauhut is the right word, and Tim Renner. And you all, warmly welcome. I'm very happy to welcome you all at the EDIS Network Campus, hosting together with the Tchoban Foundation the common event on the mind-blowing visionary Mark Fisher. Knowing only a bit of the breathtaking and eccentric scenarios Mark Fisher did for the shows for the world-leading bands and rock groups and pop groups of the 80s and 90s, we would expect a person with an equally eccentric character. Not so Mark Fisher. My partner Hans-Jürgen Kommerell and I luckily met, possible with the help of a member of our family, Roland Kommerell, maybe you know him, yeah? who was president of Decca Records in London in the 90s. When we visited Mark in his tiny red brick house in 51 Wharton Street in Clerkenwell, is this right, or Clerken? Good, okay. In Clerkenwell. At the very end of the previous century, we encountered a highly concentrated, attentive, listening person, cordially, friendly, and modest, occupied just with the final production of the Millennium Dome scenario he developed together with Peter Gabriel. When we visited him, we did not even know he has in charge of this prestigious project. We approached him to do an exhibition at EDIS on sketches for some of the stage designs he did for the Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, Genesis, U2, and many others. The Berliners at least remember Roger Waters' The Wall concert, late summer 1990, amidst in the ruins of a former no man's land between Potsdamer Platz and Brandenburg. Mark was intrigued by the idea of an exhibition because also working with all these megastars, the public usually overlook the genius behind all this stunning and overwhelming one-of-a-kind universes Mark Fisher conceptualized to enchant the thousands of visitors of the mega concerts. To make a long story short, the reason why we finally have to give up, and we don't like to do this, was we could not pay the money. The big media companies behind these famous bands owing the entire trading rights. You can imagine how happy we are when 20 years later, Nadia Bartels came up with the idea of an exhibition on the drawings of Mark Fisher. Christina Garcia has served for the public. It's great pleasure for us that you are here this evening. Thank you very much. Now I would like to give the word to Nadia Bartels, director of the Tchoban Foundation. Please.
Dear friends, dear Christine, thank you very much for your really very moving introduction. I do not really know what to add to it. This was really amazing, and to know the story behind it. And concerning the exhibition idea, it was actually Neil who put this story in action, but I'll return to it a couple of minutes later. Today's panel discussion is actually the second day of the celebration of the opening of Mark Fisher's exhibition. And yesterday we had a very amazing opening. There were so many great people there, and it was a special honor to have our very special guest, Jean-Michel Jarre, at the audience, and he made a very moving speech about Mark. I was very touched. He said Mark Fisher was not only visionary, he was not only a gifted architect, he was also a very modest person. He was very friendly, and he had an amazing sense of humor, very dry humor. He was very famous for it. So, well, it was very interesting to hear more about his collaboration with Mark and how all designs were created, finally. And as Christine already said, Mark worked with the most famous bands like the Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, with Elton John, Jean-Michel Jarre, Tina Turner, just to mention a few. And I think this is a pity that the creators of these amazing entertainment shows, television shows or rock concerts often remain unknown. Because what we see is the result. We all enjoy the shows, but we do not know the architect behind it. Mark was surely one of the stars of the branch. So this is the opportunity to commemorate Mark Fisher and his amazing work. How it all started. It was approximately 3 years ago when I was talking to my friend, Dr. Neil Bingham, who is a renowned architectural historian and who was a curator at the Royal Institute of British Architects and V&A, a curator of architectural drawings, and who wrote many publications on architectural drawings, for example, 100 Years of Architectural Drawing. And we were talking about exhibitions and ideas, and he told me he knows Cristina Garcia, who is an architect and based in London. And besides, she was a wife of Mark Fisher, and if I ever saw his drawings. So we were talking, got in touch, and we made an appointment, and I went to the studio of Mark Stufish and saw these amazing drawings. Neil said yesterday, breathtaking, really. And I knew at once we have to show them at the museum. So I put everything in motion to persuade everybody, and I was very lucky to have your support, Christine, so that we could realize and make this exhibition. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Neil, for your support all the time, and Christina. I have to say she made an amazing design for the exhibition. So if you get a chance, please go to our museum and see this amazing installation and beautiful exhibition. It's all Christina and Neil who created that. Mark Fisher has got a connection to Berlin as well, as Christina mentioned. On the 21st of July, 1990, there was this concert by Roger Waters on the Potsdamer Square. So now it's Potsdamer Square. And it was in the middle of nowhere at that time. And the stage set was about collapsing of the wall at the end of the show. And as you know, just a few months before the show, the Berlin Wall went down as well. So we were going to talk at the panel tonight also what it meant for Berlin audience. What was the meaning of this concert? What was the atmosphere of that time? What was the mood of that time? And I'm especially proud to have a renowned musical scholar, Michael Rauchhut, today at the panel, who is a professor in Norway, and he's an expert on the GDR music scene, and I'm really thrilled and curious to know more about the mood of that time and what this concert meant to Berlin audience. And I'm also very proud to have a very special and renowned moderator today at the panel, Tim Renner, who is a very renowned personality in the music world. He worked for Polygram and he was the head of the Universal Music Deutschland. And now he's running the Motor Entertainment Corporation, and he's a writer and a professor as well, and perhaps one of the most influential people in the music scene, of course known by everybody. So I'm really looking forward to today's discussion, and after the discussion we probably will have an informal part and go to the beautiful garden and the dry weather. Probably, I hope there will be no rain, so we can have a drink and talk about Mark Fisher. And my special thank goes also to Sergei Tchoban, who is with us today. Unfortunately, he couldn't be there yesterday, but well, today he is here, the audience, and thank you very much for making this exhibition possible. Thank you.
So hello, a quick hello from my side. Actually, I didn't hesitate when Nadia and Axel were coming up with the idea me having the role of the moderator tonight or this afternoon, because I'd got two good reasons for this. What I felt kind of close to Mark already. One was I believe my granddad. Whenever the family speaks about him, he is one of the 10 architects who developed the Kaiser Wilhelm Gedächtniskirche, this ruin in the middle of West Berlin. Not the greatest piece of architecture though, but pretty well known. Nobody mentioned, I only found out years later, that he was one of the 3 architects of the set of Metropolis, the movie of Fritz Lang. And there you already see, like, if you do a permanent architecture, like a church, people will talk about you. If you do something that is temporary, like the architecture for a film, it's suddenly not mentioned. And for me, it's much more impressive what he did there than what he did with the church. And the second reason is, one of the key reasons I said yes when I was having my wonderful job at Motor and asked my wife to take over. She's still running Motor today, my company. When I was asked by Klaus Wowereit, at that time mayor of Berlin, to become a politician and to work for the cultural scene as a permanent secretary of culture, it was that I had got the feeling that some part of our culture are not seen as culture. It's the entire field of pop rock, which is so important to so many people and became, thanks to Woodstock, thanks to the Beatles playing in stadiums, suddenly something that was entering the world of millions and was moving their heart. Mark once said in an interview that a rock concert is the tribal gathering of our culture. And I think that is also not respected enough. What kind of extremely important piece of culture there is in the pop rock scene. It's not respected enough what temporary architecture means. And that's why I thought, wow, when I heard that people like Sergei, Nadia, Axel are working on stuff like an exhibition about Mark Fisher. And of course I said, yes, I would love to talk to Christina, I would love to talk to Neil, who did put this together with Christina and Michael about this. But before I'm doing so, we have got the chance to listen to Michael, who will tell us how all this was perceived on the other side of the wall. And of course, Neil will lead us into the deep secrets of the architecture of Mark Fisher. And afterwards, we will talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. I've prepared a little speech. The music of Pink Floyd belongs to the soundtrack of my life. Even as a child, I was captivated by the spherical sounds of the Syd Barrett era. Later, I managed to get every single album, often with difficulty. Pink Floyd seemed light years apart from my little country, the GDR, but they were always around. I remember a hitchhiking trip to Prague at the end of October 1982. Once again, I wanted to feel a piece of freedom before I had to join the army for a year and a half. On the outskirts of my hometown, I got into a Danish truck. The driver, a bearded, freaky guy, outed himself as a Pink Floyd fan. He told me about the movie The Wall, and his eyes sparkled. In Denmark, the film had raised a lot of dust. It was accused of obscenity and glorification of violence. What nonsense. The man behind the wheel knew how to interpret the scenes in question: children being turned into a uniform mass, the faceless swarming of worms, copulating flowers, morphing into snarling beasts. I understood absolutely nothing. I had my own images in mind. My desires grew. I dreamed of watching the film myself one day, of experiencing Pink Floyd live on stage, preferably open air, with as many fans as possible who all feel the same way as I do. Pink Floyd enjoyed a comparatively good official reputation in the GDR. Sure, there were no concerts, no tickets, no t-shirts, buttons, posters. There was a constant lack of information. But at least the state record company released The Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here under license, and you could buy The Wall in so-called intershops. The Dark Side of the Moon hit East German stores in 1979, exactly the same year that the Rolling Stones were freed from the GDR's poison cabinets. The Stones were considered the incarnation of Western decadence and remained on the index for 15 years. Pink Floyd, on the other hand, had always been highly respected. The press praised the innovative power and, starting with the 1977 record Animals, focused on the political message. The Wall was acclaimed for its progressive power as well. According to a rock encyclopedia published in the GDR, the double album was the climax so far in the band's history because, I quote, "It depicts the systematic alienation and dehumanization in the capitalist world, which piles up stone by stone to form a wall." Surprisingly, the author translated the term wall as Mauer and not as Wand, as did, for example, the youth radio station DT64, which apparently wanted to avoid any association with the intra-German border. Now and then, the GDR's music press published articles on Pink Floyd. The radio played and dissected their songs. The band was a popular target of cranky analysis, broadcasts and specials and nighttime programs. Listening to the specials on Amalgama, The Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, Animals, The Wall, and The Final Cut today, one repeatedly wants to cover one's ears. So absurd is the pseudo-intellectual interpretation, so embarrassing the ignorance. In the West, however, it was often just as bad. The Rowohlt Rock Encyclopedia argued, I quote, "Taken as a whole, Pink Floyd music hardly sounded different from playing a 19th century violin sonata on the Hammond organ." The author apparently thought this bullshit was so great that he still had it printed in the 5th edition in 2008. Pink Floyd, which was special and mainstream at the same time, was the object of great enthusiasm of the weirdos, snobs, and cynics. The fan didn't care about the blasé attitude of the outsiders. He filtered out the useful information from the rubble and was primarily interested in the music. This was regularly offered to him by the GDR radio. Pink Floyd could often be heard in the disco, too. I remember the DJ playing one of these days at an event of the Junge Pioniere in my small Brandenburg hometown in the early 1970s. Later, another brick in the wall was on heavy rotation. Ambitious bands covered Pink Floyd in their concerts. Remft enjoyed the spacey period. Berluk played a flawless version of Shine On, You Crazy Diamond. In 1982, I attended a performance by the Sorbian band Patz on the monastery premises of Neuzelle. They had been invited to a youth pilgrimage and surprised their audience with the sound trips of Syd Barrett. With some luck, the East German fan actually had the chance to experience Pink Floyd live 6 years later. However, only acoustically, cut off from any visual contact and already without Roger Waters. The band performed in front of the Reichstag in West Berlin on June the 16th, 1988, just a few steps behind the wall. Open-air concerts at this sensitive location had been a recurring problem for years. The West always turned a part of the loudspeakers towards the East, calling it a bridge-building measure. For the SED, the Communist Party, the acoustic border violation was simply a political provocation. On the Whitsun weekend in 1987, a scandal happened. The 3-day concert for Berlin took place in front of the Reichstag with David Bowie, the Eurythmics, and Genesis as headliners. The event attracted a total of 6,000 East German fans who gathered in front of the Brandenburg gate and in the streets nearby. The state feared a spontaneous storming of the wall and mobilized police and the Stasi on the large scale, with the effect that the peaceful gathering turned into political protest. The masses shouted for Gorbachev, they chanted, "We want freedom," and "Tear down the wall." Over the weekend, 158 people were arrested. The Western press responded vehemently. The GDR officials rejected any criticism and accused the West of hypocrisy. In fact, the festival was also addressed to the East right from the beginning. Radio stations like the RIAS fueled anticipations for weeks. Concert promoter Peter Schwenko finally had a quarter of the loudspeakers turned towards the East. David Bowie and Genesis singer Phil Collins welcomed East German onlookers during their shows. When the next big Reichstag festival took place in June 1988, this time with Pink Floyd and Michael Jackson, the GDR state was prepared. Simultaneously, it invited all music lovers to a huge open-air festival in Weißensee in East Berlin, which was packed with international and West German rock stars. In addition, a large number of police and military personnel were deployed in the East Berlin city center, as well as no less than 6,000 FDJ propagandists, SED agitators, and Stasi employees. They were supposed to avoid any escalation. Disciplined young people who gathered in the area near the border, which had been declared a pedestrian zone, were allowed to do so. And so, quite a few Pink Floyd fans experienced a great moment, which certainly was not unclouded. The concert ended with 3 songs from The Wall, sung by David Gilmour. Initially, The Wall was a solo project by Roger Waters, which he recorded with his old bandmates and brought into the arenas. The impulse for the opulent work had been provided by an incident in Montreal's Olympic Stadium during the last concert of the Animals tour in 1977. The sound was bad, the audience began to riot. When a fan climbed over the barrier and stormed the stage, shouting loudly, the pent-up frustrations erupted. Roger Waters spat right in the teenager's face. In retrospect, Waters said, I quote him, "Immediately afterwards, I was shocked by my behavior. I realized that what had once been a worthwhile and manageable exchange between us, the band, and them, the audience, had been utterly perverted by scale, corporate avarice, and ego. Being a rock star, you become comfortably numb. In order to remain in the dream, that's the required condition." Roger Waters wanted to comment on the sadomasochistic madness with a wall that would be built during the upcoming shows. The visual approach was typical of his way of working. Barry Miles, a friend and renowned biographer of the band, had already observed this approach during the early years of Pink Floyd. I quote him, "Roger Waters was the most obviously architectural in the construction of his music, but Rick Wright and Nick Mason shared his approach. all three were architectural students, of course, down to planning songs with diagrams and graphs rather than words scribbled in pencil on the back of an envelope. The Wall was released as a double album in November 1979, followed by the film in 1982. The show was performed live in 1980 and 1981 in only 4 cities, a total of 31 times. After that, the band fell apart. Mike Fisher and Jonathan Park were responsible for the stage design. The great challenge, according to Mike Fisher, was to adequately convey the philosophical thoughts through high technology, but not to obscure them. The result was groundbreaking. It provided the visual blueprint for everything that would follow, from U2 to Rammstein. For the East German Pink Floyd fan, The Wall got under their skin even without the pre-produced images. Most of them probably didn't even have an idea what the lyrics were actually about. Rock music is a medium that reflects our own desires. Roger Waters tried to square the circle with The Wall. He attacked the temptations and distortions of the modern society, and at the same time made use of its tools by creating a spectacle that is larger than life. One can criticize this as cynicism and reject any further discussion from this point on, but one can also recognize a brilliant vision and universality in this piece of art. Isolation, abuse of power, and despair are subjects that unfortunately never become irrelevant. When the Berlin Wall fell in November 1989, Roger Waters was asked if he would perform The Wall again. The show was intended to be both a statement on the political changes in the world and a charity event for the Memorial Fund for Disaster Relief. This fund had been established shortly before by retired British Colonel Leonard Cheshire, who had served as a bomber pilot during the Second World War. The veteran pursued an ambitious goal, I quote him, to collect £5, about 15 Deutschmark at the time, for each of the estimated 100 million lives lost in international conflicts during the course of this century. Cheshire desired to create a living memorial to all those who have died in war by providing a fund that would help the future victims of natural disasters like flood, earthquake, or famine. The Wall was planned as a kick-off of the fundraising campaign. All artists waived their fees. Roger Waters was able to recruit prominent collaborators, including Cyndi Lauper, Sinead O'Connor, Joni Mitchell, Marianne Faithfull, Bryan Adams, Van Morrison, and members of the band. Germany was represented by Ute Lemper and the Scorpions. On April the 11th, 1990, Berlin's municipal authority approved the show of superlatives at the Potsdamer Platz. The former borderland was cleared of unexploded bombs from the Second World War. The stage construction took almost 2 months. When the gates opened on July the 21st, 350,000 people flocked to the area instead of the expected 180,000. This is what the police reports say. When the situation seemed to be getting out of control, they ordered all the fences to be opened. The code word was Woodstock. After an extensive warm-up program, the main show, The Wall, started at around 10 p.m. It was recorded by television and broadcast in 31 countries. 1 billion viewers were expected. Later, a double CD and a video cassette followed. The international press response was enormous. German media reported mainly on the many accidents of the concert and the record-breaking logistics and poured out plenty of mockery. They called the show a huge flop and, referring to the sponsors, a gigantic commercial. They laughed at Roger Waters' rock Grusike and his monument of megalomania. The Bild-Zeitung, Yellow Press, on the other hand, hailed the Mad Night on the death trap. It wrote little about the music, but all the more in detail about the buffet in the VIP lounge. When I remember The Wall on that hot Berlin summer night, the pink paper mask every ticket buyer received comes to my mind. On the back is written in English and German, "Hold this mask up to your face during empty spaces in the first half and during waiting for the warmth in the second half." I remember the fans who had come from all over the world and the Babel, and how Roger Waters went down on his knees when the sound completely collapsed for the third time. I can hardly recall individual songs or performances. The conditions were just too bad. But I still remember walking across Leipziger Straße after the show and the encore haunting me like a mantra in an endless loop: the tide is turning. Events like the Wall are not made for the moment, but for eternity. Mike Fisher is absolutely right when he sums up, I quote him, "The show was a landmark. It's one of those things that is marvelous to lock away in the memory. It should be remembered with satisfaction and pride." Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here, I thank everyone, as everybody else keeps thanking everyone, so I feel I'm full of thank yous already. So, Tim mentioned that it's very true. We get the names of the architects and scene designers of past theater pieces over the last many, many centuries tend to get lost, and the only way they seem to survive is if their architectural drawings survive. And so very few of these do. I mean, there are thousands in many collections, but they're mainly unidentified. There are exceptions. In England, in the early 17th century, there are costume designs and scenery designs by Inigo Jones, for example, for the Stuart court. And so we know a little bit about what happened in that period. In the 18th century, it was the Italians who mainly dominated the scenographic world, and the Bibbiena family, there's many, many hundreds of drawings attributed to them. But again, we rarely know the names of the productions, and it's only like when we get to Schinkel, for example, in the early 19th century here in Germany, and his famous designs for the Zauberflaute, the magic flute, the Queen of the Night with the stars behind and all that, that we start to understand much more about the history of the theater and theater design. But this afternoon, I just wanted to say a few words about the Wall in terms of architectural drawing and a few images I've got. Like the exhibition, all these images come from the Mark Fisher archive, which is basically Christina's archive in association with Stu Fish, exhibition architects. And Stu Fish, it was Mark's studio, Studio Fisher, that he left behind, and it's still going very, very strongly. And last night when Michel Jarre mentioned his working with Mark, he's still working with the studio now, so there's a great continuation. Michael mentioned the part of the wall being stone on stone. Actually, you can see in this photograph of our protagonist standing here, it was cardboard on cardboard, actually, great pieces of cardboard for the bricks. And then this is 1980, the very first tour of the Wall, 1980-81. They used the cardboard, and then for the 90 performance, they used polyurethane bricks and all that. Just a quick little tour of where Mark came from. Mark studied at the Architectural Association in London, did his degree there in the late 1960s, graduating in 1971. And his teachers were members of the Archigram Group. Now, the Archigram are probably the most famous late 20th century fantasy architects, you would argue, but based in, not in building, but in a new way of living, in a new life, in a very technological way. And Peter Cook, for example, you can see in this slide here of one of his drawings, which is a drawing and a montage of photographs. It's an idea for an instant city in Bournemouth, which is on the coast, the Channel in England. And it's just an idea of an instant way of a city appearing just for entertainment for the day or two as well. And it comes in by balloon. Everything is floated in. So these are ideas that Mark very quickly picked up on. Mark was an excellent draftsman in himself, and then began to take on their style, you would argue, although he always maintained his own visual identity. But one of the things that he retained was this kind of cartoonish idea to draw almost like in a cartoon style. It's pop art, isn't it? Because this is the era of pop art. And we see in this drawing, this is his design for Amersham Harry, which is an ordinary bloke from Amersham, just a suburban town just outside of London. And this is his idea for a pneumatic architecture, because he was very, very much into, at the Architectural Association, into blow-ups. So, and his thesis was on this. So in the slide, you can see on the left-hand side, no, on the right-hand side, you can see a blow-up of what's happening on the right-hand side, an enlargement. And the idea in the scheme was that there would be a raft, which he has designed, that the car would float on across the English Channel, land here in France, and then out of the boot or the trunk of the car, he would press a button, and a villa, as you can see in multi-styles, just emerges. So his seaside villa. So again, it seems like fantasy. We talk about him almost as a fantasy architect, but that's not true at all. He was an absolute perfectionist in terms of technology. He was an engineer as much as he was an architect. And he knew, there was this famous line that Buckminster Fuller used to say to all the architects he met, and they would show him their buildings, and he'd say, so how much does it weigh? And they were all mystified by this. But Mark Fisher would know exactly how much everything weighed, because when it came to the time when he started to do the rock staging, he had to take all the stage material and fit them into boxes and know exactly how much they would weigh and fit in. So from the AA, he set up with a friend of his, with Jonathan Park, who was an engineer, and one of the very first things they were asked to do was by Pink Floyd, and that was to work on the 1977 Animals tour. And for that, they just created a series of blow-up figures of a family, of the Animals tour family you can see here on the far slide. And it's a group of consumers. It's a big fat mama in the chair and the big bloated son, a big pink Cadillac, and a television set, and a refrigerator spilling out the guts of all these sausages. And you can see Mark here standing beside it in 77. So, I mean, he literally sewed these things together himself, you know. He designed them, and they all sat around sewing them. So here you see a design he's got for the deployment of that refrigerator. So at the top you can see it comes out on a little wire, and then it slowly opens up and it spills its contents over. So this was really, you know, the beginning of what he always called when he joined the circus. And the circus it was for him, and he was a great enthusiast about things like circuses, because these were the forerunners of the pop shows beforehand, and moving things around. So for the Wall, which was the 1979, it went into design for the 80-81 tour. Pink Floyd asked him to do more inflatables and to be the stage designer. And this is a design that didn't come off, that Mark had, for touring the show. And of course, it's a large building, like a tent, but it's an inflatable of a huge size. As you can see, he's drawn the crowd here. Beautiful pencil sketches. He's absolutely excellent when it comes to pencil, although the pen was actually his real, the fountain pen even was his real drawing skill. But you'll see in these series of designs the skill that he has. I thought I'd just quickly go through a few designs that he did for the wall. So this is for the 1980 scene. This is a plan. And we can see going right through the center, the horizontal line going through, that's the wall in cardboard. And then on either side, especially at the back, you have a large triangle. That's projection onto the screen behind where the band is and the like. So he works out these things to perfection. So there's a close-up of that section you can see with the wall moving right through the center. And he's also specified the lifts, because behind the wall, he had a series of, counting the lifts here, he seems to have had 5 lifts. And these would have the technicians on them, and they would be putting the bricks in place as they go up. And at the very end, the lifts would come down very fast, and they would push them. For this part of the tour, they even had a very kind of special little tool that knocked everything out. And here's 3 elevations as well of the wall in its lowered position, and during the performance, it builds up. And then in the final, he's giving it a number here. So again, in the center, you can see we're looking at the back elevation of it here with the lifts and the technician at the top. And then in the lower elevation, every brick has been numbered and ready for placement. I think the show was Roger Walters. I've never seen the show, but the video is online at the moment. And I hope it stays online. But you can see it's a great angst piece. It's a rock opera, and Roger Walters in it. It talks about his childhood, and we have the teacher in it, and his mother, who's obviously been horrible to him as well. So it's all a bit tragic going on. And here we have a design by Mark, showing how it could be lifted, every piece could be lifted into place. Very precise, very, very precise. And this is a series, he did a huge series of that. We've got 6 of them in the exhibition, large pieces about this size of pencil drawings, again, showing the show. And this is probably for Los Angeles as well. But if you notice the drawing, I mean, a quarter of the drawing is just taken up with a stage light in the lower left-hand corner. And it's illuminating the teacher inflated figure that Mark has created using the designs of the illustrator Gerald Scarfe, who was very much involved in this as well. But the way the graduation of the pencil works right across, it's a skill to be able to do light and dark. But especially, the amazing thing, of course, with Mark is most of the shows he does are night shows. So you'll see in the exhibition, everything is on a black background always. And sometimes it's a black paper, but often like this, it's a heavy use of pencil shading, always with thousands of crowds. So these are the pieces that he sold his show to the pop stars with, right? And they were really impressed by this, right? And here's a really fun piece on the far side, and a very blurry image of the blow-up at the center. But this is of the show itself, a design for the show, showing the backstage. But it's a large pen drawing. I mean, it's quite huge, and it's done in multi-perspective. So it's a fisheye view. So, and leaning against the piano is Mark himself and his partner Jonathan. Park. So this type of use of of the fisheye is new to architectural drawing, because the fisheye lens in photography has just been introduced in the 1960s and 70s. It's often picked up by the pop artists themselves by doing it, and so he incorporates this now into his own designs. So there's his design on the far side for the teacher figure, and you can see it's quite complex. It's on runners, it's pneumatic, it's articulated, and here we have a photograph of him. So the cane would go up and down as he walks across, very menacing. Mark did so many shows, and in a way, what's interesting, of course, is that we're talking about the wall, 1980 and then 1990, and this is really the early part of Mark's career, because if we say it begins in 77 and he lives till 2013, he does much, much more after that. But this is done 1988, just 2 years before the wall here in Berlin, and it's for Jean-Michel Jarre's Destination Docklands. And this is another incredible piece of one of Mark's work done using airbrushing for the spotlights, and that's one of his highlights. So you can imagine he has to lay down pieces of paper on either side of where he's going to create the light, the white light, and then use his special airbrushing tool on this. And he's quite a master at this, quite a master. And you're seeing the projections that are showing on the back of the big buildings. This is in Docklands, when it was quite abandoned at the time, and a stage that's right out the front. Jean-Michel Jarre yesterday spoke very eloquently of this moment, and he said they were all rocking up and down, and it was pouring rain, and they were made to wear life vests and everything by the laws and all that. He said it was a crazy night. I think Princess Diana turned out. There was two nights for the show. But here for the 1990 show, Mark created this site design. And what's fascinating about this 1990 period, 1988, 1989, 90, is the introduction of the computer into architectural offices. So Mark becomes one of the architects. He's a crossover architect. One of those people who begins to learn using drawing instruments in the most traditional way that's been going on for 200 or 300 years. And then suddenly computer-aided design, CAD design, comes into the office, and he and his other office members pick it up with alacrity. And so here we see a very simple drawing, because it's a very simple tool at this time, for the site plan with the Brandenburg gate at the top, and then he could never leave a drawing alone, even a simple drawing. So he's used electrotone to give a sense of a texture to the site itself. And these are the little towers for sound towers going around with the stage across the center. And Christina's very kindly lent me these wonderful shots that Mark himself took, so you can see the Reichstag at the back here to give a bit of sense. And they're testing out putting the wall up. And here again, a very simple computer elevations, CAD elevations for the moment that the army, the Red Army course and trucks move across the whole thing. And these are pieces he's added on with collage, so he's photographed and then added on to the design to make it with the large central screen and the cranes moving out across. And here you can see bits of the wall being dropped in. So there we are in 2 months. I didn't know that it had taken 2 months to put it together. I can believe that. So. And a few more of Mark's drawings, designs for it. You can see these wonderful pencil, it moves across this way. He graduates it into sections at the front. The white of the light is the white of the paper, and then the heavy marking down below for the stage, for the crowd as well. And this is the mother figure who actually just turned, when it came down to the day, was a projection and not a mounted. There she is being projected on the screen. And the teacher figure as well, who comes across in this section. So you can see literally the staircases going up and how he's held together. And the great moment, the pig starts to break through the wall in this design. And the pig had to be blown up in an air hanger and brought, I think actually manufactured in an air hanger, so large it was. And here in this wonderful drawing again. Yeah. It must have been amazing, amazing moments. And this is very typical of Marc. He always loved an aerial view, because he was a pilot himself, right? He knew, I mean, aerial views, bird's eye perspectives are very common in architectural drawing, but it's very rare that you get the architect who really has seen it, you know, and really can visualize that way. And so we have the two beams of light coming down at that very moment with the teacher coming through. You can see the size of this figure. This is the one I love. So this is a little Mercedes-Benz, you know, with the Reichstag behind. And here he is in action on the night. And I just thought I'd end with this because I think that somewhere in the crowd you'll see Michael with his mask here. Thank you very much.
So thank you. It's great having you here, and thank you for the inputs the two of you gave. Christina, how does it feel? Out of my point of view, it took quite a while for Marc to get a solo exhibition like this one. Is it the first one that is done on him? And why so? And how does it feel as the one who was closest to him for 25 years?
Well, the exhibition is certainly the first one. It's never before it's been done. How do I feel? I feel it is emotional for me. It is something that I have been wanting to do for a very long time. When Marc died in 2013, I had to deal with the loss. I was very busy as an architect myself. I had to see what I really had in there. But I found that going back to work was going to be the best thing to do. It would save me a little bit from that kind of period, which was very hard. But at the same time, I started looking into the archive. Everything was not totally organized, but there was quite an order already that Marc had done there. And but I realized actually the scale of what I had. So I've been looking at these drawings, and it took me actually 3 or 4 years to go into it in detail, cataloging it, and I went through all the drawings. So it's a relief. It's very emotional. I'm a bit tired of looking at the same pictures all the time as well. But again and again, every time you look at them, you see something different. You see how amazing he was, how incredible drawer he was, and I'm extremely happy. So that's the way I feel, happy and relief as well.
That's really great, and you actually, I can promise you, you feel happy and kind of close to Marc when you're in the exhibition, because it's really done. It's got a kind of really personal touch to it, which makes the whole thing so really, really, really strong. And of course, also his way of painting. You, Neil, in the book, I only can ask you all, I think it's 25 euros, Nadia, to buy this book, where we have got a great article also of Neil about Marc and his work. There you compare him a little bit with all the inspiration that you see in his work of Dürer, of Schinkel, and yesterday we had got Jean-Michel Jarre even saying, no, it's Leonardo da Vinci. So when you actually see him in a connection there, is Jean-Michel Jarre right?
Yeah, that's very true. And it's funny because Christina and I talk about the Leonardo, and I need hardly tell you that Marc, of course, knew Leonardo's works as well. Marc has left behind the most fantastic library, and you can almost read his mind, read his mind, and see the influences that that influences shows. And the influences are, you know, like I said, the circus, for example, but the Russian constructivists, 1920s, a lot of the pop art of the time. But in terms of architectural drawing style, you can see he's very traditional. So even though he's training under the Archigram, who are doing those wonderful pieces, and he does pop pieces as well, the point about Mark is it's always in reality. Everything is buildable. So to call him a fantasy architect is incorrect. He's the exact opposite. He's a realist architect. And you can see that in the traditional way he does his drawings. So, you mentioned earlier, well, there's two things I wanted to pick up. Was first of all, there's a film in the exhibition. There's 3 films exactly, but there's one that's terribly moving of Mark speaking and drawing as well. And even though I never met Mark myself, although we probably were in the same room many, many times at openings in London, you can really feel him in that film. And as for why there's never been a show on Mark, he did show his drawings back in the 70s and 80s, for example, once in a while, and they were published early on. Peter Cook, for example, of Archigram, had his own gallery, and Mark would show like Amersham, for example. That set was shown as well. But after that, no, I think he was just too busy, wasn't he? And architectural drawings are just a working tool for the architect. They're just set aside at the end to be discovered by us afterwards, as you well know. So, yeah, so we were, I mean, tickled pink that Mr. Tchoban, you know, had it here. But, you know, we'd love to have a venue in London. That's where it should be next. But getting that is so difficult.
Fingers crossed that you succeed. So Michael, you were showing the mask. So I have got the expectation you did buy a ticket, or did you just crush the gate?
No, I bought a ticket. Yes, and I was relatively early in the area, perhaps 3 or 4 hours in advance, and it was really a hot day. I remember a lot of dust, and the conditions were quite bad, I guess, for most of the masses. But nevertheless, I totally agree with Mike Fischer. It was a moment for eternity, and everybody who joins the concert this night will remember it for the rest of his or her life, I'm sure.
I remember it too. It was a bit what Berlin also is about. For me, it was a great idea. It was a bit mad. It was a bit crazy to do it in a way. It was total chaos, but it worked at the end. So that's pretty much what my Berlin feeling is. I was pushed into a VIP sector, where I was suddenly standing in between the foreign minister of Eastern Germany and the foreign minister of Western Germany. It was highly protected, but it was such a chaos that they suddenly grabbed people and pushed them just to make sure that they have got enough space there on the actual thing. Did Mark ever, you were not together with Mark at this moment, I believe?
No,
you
that was 2 years before I met him. So that
2 years before you met him?
I met Mark in 1991, yeah.
Okay. So did he ever talked about this? Was it for him a really special moment, the Roger Waters show in Berlin?
Yeah, but he didn't talk very much about it. And I think he was extremely busy, 89 and 90. He was doing Steel Wheels. He was doing the Urban Jungle, and well, which was almost the same. And at the same time, the wall was happening. So he was probably, and I think that was the moment when his career really took off in terms of his relationship with some of the biggest bands in the world, which made him and gave him the opportunity to create all these incredible structures, right? So yeah.
So you have never seen the wall production yourself, or?
Yes, I have seen the wall production and the versions that came after that. I mean, there was one in 2010 that was very, and every time that it happens, something changes and gets better and better, you know. Instead of projections, you have LED screens and everything gets easier. it doesn't take two months to put it up. It takes hours, and so I have been watching the same show several times. Yeah, it's still on.
And is it true that Mark never did see the fall of the wall live? Because whenever the wall was falling in the show, it's one said in an interview, he had to be on the left hand of the stage to conduct the actual process. Or is this urban myth?
That it's totally possible, but I don't know really. In fact, there's some interesting pictures of after the wall comes down, and it's a picture that he took from inside. So probably he was not at the front; he was at the back of the wall, trying to make everything work properly. Yeah. But I don't know the answers. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, well, the thing is, isn't it, Christina, that Mark never, ever stopped working. So even during a show, he was photographing, he was watching everything, right? So he never socialized, I understand, during the show. It was just work. Wow. So I can imagine him being at the back, working.
And also, like one yesterday, I don't know how you experienced this, Michael, when we were listening to Jean-Michel Jarre, it didn't feel for me like Jean-Michel Jarre talking about an artist he was in cooperation with. It was more Jean-Michel Jarre talking about a band member. It nearly felt like he's part of the actual band.
Yes, and I can imagine that they really had a very intense connection with each other, and that they shared ideas, visions, and I guess it was like a give and take. Somebody started the idea and got the ball rolling, and I guess it was this kind of process for me as an outsider. I can imagine it was this way, a give and take.
And the process, like yesterday I learned that easily Mark came like to stay a week with Jean-Michel Jarre in his house in Paris just to reflect ideas and things like that. So I believe this musician nearly became also part of your family in a way.
Yeah, he was certainly very close to Jean-Michel. They worked together in many projects. Some of them he didn't mention, but they work in Egypt as well, and all over the world. And they had a connection. They could spend hours talking about ideas. Mark would spend hours sketching up his understanding of the ideas, and in the end, after 3 or 4 hours sitting together, they will have something, right? So yeah, he used to do that often with him. He was one of the best collaborators, I think.
What was his close relation? Was it his first relation, Pink Floyd, or was it later on Jean-Michel Jarre or any other artist where you have got the feeling that they connected in their art together in a really strong way?
I think the relationship that he had with Jean-Michel was quite special. But he had a good relationship with Bonham and Edge, especially. And from the Rolling Stones, for example, he used to say that Charlie, who sadly passed away last week, was also very good at having this kind of workshops and coming up with good proposals. And Charlie and Mick were the main kind of instigators of the big ideas. But then he interacted with many artists, some younger, Lady Gaga. He thought she was fantastic. And I don't know, Mark was good at listening, and he could have a working relationship with almost anybody. He would just listen for a very long time, sketch, and then help that artist particularly to build up what they wanted, right? To create, to develop the idea into something spectacular.
Yeah, that's exactly what he is famous for, isn't it, really? He would remain quite silent during most of the meetings often, wouldn't he? He'd be listening to everybody, he'd be sketching, he'd hold up the sketch at the end, and he says, I think this is what you've all been talking about, and it would be.
Yeah, and he didn't stop sketching. For me, it was kind of also interesting to see that we also have got drawings from the very last show that the two of you picked up.
Yes.
Because you would imagine, like he and also Johnson Park, extremely early, I believe even the 80s, discovered the possibilities they suddenly had got thanks to computers and software helping them in constructing. But obviously Mark didn't 100% trust the computer, or he did on top do his drawings to give this personal touch. It feels a bit like I still have got vinyl at home, even though that I listen to a lot of music digital, that he lives in both worlds.
Yeah, I think, well, as an architectural drawings historian, of course, I'm, absolutely pro it. And it is becoming slightly a bit of a lost art, as we say. But there's a bit of a revival going on now. And last week, for example, I spent a day out in Wiltshire countryside with about 30 students about to take architecture, all who had been on a week's course doing architectural drawing, the first time. And the thing is that it's always the sketchbook that, if you really want to see the mind of the architect, you look at the sketchbook, right? And how many sketchbooks did Mark leave behind?
We have like 171.
171, right? So it's just a shelf full, right? All perfectly dated, of course. But I mean, an exhibition just of that, of the sketchbooks, would be marvelous in itself. So, yeah, it's the sketch for him.
He used the sketchbook as continually, not only for his work, for personal things as well. You open the first page of the sketchbook, he will have a list of all the flights that he had taken during that period. Yeah. The date, the BA 134, every single thing was there. Credit cards, business cards, he will stick all the cards into the sketchbook as well. And as I said, if you go through all of them, really, you understand the man as much as you understand the artist, right, and the architect. I remember one time we were living in a small apartment in London. I had some visitors, and we had an inflatable bed that I didn't know how to make work. He was in LA working. I think it was Division Bell, and he sent me a fax, long, like 2 meters long, with drawings that explain exactly and precisely how I needed to inflate the thing. And then
You were impressed.
I was totally impressed, and I'm sorry because I didn't keep that fax. But when I went through the books again, I discovered that he had some sketches there as well about the. And when we moved to a house, he had everything there as well designed. We were designing, customizing things, and he was sending me ideas. It was great, yeah. So, and all of that is there, so you can see.
There was no Mark Fisher of the East. Was that one of the reasons the system never worked? You guys actually focused pretty much on impress with this picture on military parades, but you missed out the bit to actually work with music and stuff like that.
But telling you the truth, there was at least one East German band, perhaps the most popular one, that copied the idea a little bit. That was the Pudis. They also had the inflatable figures on stage, and I guess they copied the idea. But you are right. Stage design was not a huge topic in East Germany, but when the war fell, of course, Gerd Hof and his light architecture for Rammstein, he had a theater background, and he made really fascinating stage designs. Rammstein is perhaps the exception to the rule, but you are right. It was more or less a little bit light, and yes, what is it? Nebel? Exactly, but that's was it more or less.
I think it's interesting because I think this show, for many people, the Mark Fisher show, is a revelation, right? Because we knew about the shows, but we didn't know about the drawings before. And I think, like so many archives, they have yet to be discovered. And I'm sure on the Soviet side and the East German side at the same time. I think they're there. They're probably hidden there. Maybe not for the rock shows, but for other stages as well. They're there, but they just haven't come out of the drawers yet. Do you know?
You even discovered something. So in the book, there's an interesting passage where Neil is saying, like, when I don't know if anybody of you has ever seen Mark's show he did for Tina Turner, where Tina Turner suddenly is nearly flying over the audience, and Neil is saying it could be that he stole this idea from a Soviet artist who make Lenin flying over the crowd.
It's true, but Mark would have known that drawing. It's in, it's in the books, and especially the late 70s, especially the early 1980s, was this rediscovery of the constructivists, the Russian constructivists of the 1920s. Catherine Curque was publishing a lot of work at that time. Zaha Hadid was, visiting Moscow and Melnikov, and her thesis itself is a Russian constructivist piece, isn't it? So they were all together at this time, all discovering these things at the same time.
But obviously, Mark was also fascinated by China. He was the first one who did, together with Jean-Michel Jarre, a big production of pop music in China when they had got this change of systems. So 81, I believe, there were a concert in Shanghai and Beijing. And he then, much later on, 2008, did the opening for the Beijing Olympics for a total different China. That time, and when I was fascinated when I was looking to one of his drawings for the, I believe, the Beijing show, where he actually incorporated the tickets and the things he put up. I had the feeling that it was kind of important for him. It was kind of a really special thing, huh?
Yeah, that was Jean-Michel Jarre China tour in 1981. In fact, Mark went on tour with him for months, right? And they were touring many places. They were playing in arenas, enclosed arenas, outdoor stadiums. They tried to do a bigger one in the Forbidden City. It was so the one you saw is part of that tour.
And I like the frame because it's in bamboo. He's done a bamboo frame around it,
Yeah, and it must have been, you haven't been there, but did he ever tell you about it? It must have been an extreme situation because you're actually entering with your aesthetics, with the art, into a big country that had no contact nearly to the Western world. And you're the first one, the first messenger of this kind of new thing.
Yeah, I think that at that point, Jean-Michel was really, really well known, really popular. He was married to Charlotte Rampling, who was a very famous artist and actress as well. So I have very, very incredible photographs of them traveling in tutus and having meetings with Chinese people, and it was really glamorous, I think, at that time, for what China was at that time, right? It was really.
But mentioning Charlotte Rampling, so life is a circle in a way, because if I understand correctly, the first inflatable was that he did for commercial use was for the movie Sardos, which was Charlotte Rampling together with Sean Connery.
Sean Connery. There's a lot of famous actors there. Yeah, I watched the film for first time recently when I was. Actually, I was in preparation of another very beautiful exhibition that was regarding inflatables that just finished in the Pompidou Center in Metz. Now it's been moved to La Cité de l'Architecture in Paris, and while I was providing with the material that I had in the archive, I found those slides, the slides that contain pictures of that film during the production, and they make the whole inflatable, they blow it up. It's a big fire. It's very interesting, and then I went and rented the video from Amazon. But I don't think the film was that good.
It isn't at all.
but it was certainly entertaining, yeah, and with a lot of very famous people. Then, yeah.
But obviously it was his kind of first step into nearly the commercial use of it. Why have inflatables that time being so fab? It seems to be the big thing in especially the 70s, and he was early with them.
It's temporary structures, actually. It's part of a whole movement of temporary structures, isn't it? So a lot of students, architectural students, starting in the 60s, actually, started to wonder about alternative forms of living, right? It's a hippie generation, right? You know, we're living on a superhighway now, and we're living in primitive huts, or we can just move around everywhere. So how can we move? Because I don't know if you remember what tents were like. They were huge, heavy canvas things that smelt, didn't they? So here you had something very light, or very light tensile structures, maybe made of aluminium. So Buckminster Fuller, working on his geodesic domes, you know, famous 1967 in Montreal Expo. You know, this is a new ways of living. So, yeah, and the moon, you know, the moon is just like, well, we just landed on the moon. God, how are we going to live on the moon? Right? So.
And was Mark a hippie?
No, I don't think he ever was a hippie.
But he was early into the scene surroundings. So he booked in 1966, I read, the Pink Floyd already for a Christmas party of his college. That was coming out in Pink Floyd interviews. One of the early gigs, they were booked by Mark, and then they met Mark ages later, 77, for the Animals. Was the original connection still going on? Do you know?
No, I don't know.
Yes, because but several. I've heard that story before. Yes, because several members of Pink Floyd began as architecture students at the Regent Street Polytechnic in central London, and then dropped out because the gigging was doing so well, right? So I think that was very important with them, because they understood architecture. They thought in 3 dimensions like an architect. They had learned themselves how to draw and sketch, you see. So the appreciation for Mark's work was, was almost like a connoisseur in a way.
Mm-hmm.
May I ask Christina a question? Since the Animals project and the Wall, both projects were to a high degree very political, and I know, or I have read, that a couple of Pink Floyd members, especially Roger Waters and Rick Wright, they claim that they have a communist background. The mother of Roger Waters was a member of the Communist Party until 1956, and I think even the parents of Rick Wright, they continued after the break 1956 in Hungary. They continued being members of the Communist Party, and Roger Waters until today, he emphasizes his lefty background. Was a political topic and the political background, was it relevant for Mike Fisher, or was he more interested in aesthetic dimensions?
Wow. Well, I'm sure it was important to him, but I'm sure he kept things separated, right? But I'm not aware. We never discuss specifics on precisely what you are asking. So, I don't know.
But he was a very liberal man, wasn't he?
Yes, certainly. Yeah.
And he was a man with great humor. So we did see the teacher. Is it true that the teacher was designed also a bit by his images, or that he inspired the hairstyle, for example? And he also used his picture of himself in his comics that he did. He's a Nemo, isn't he?
It's very difficult because Gerald Scarfe has written a whole book about the Wall. And his time with it. And it's quite interesting because everything is Gerald Scarfe, and there's a few pictures of Mark as well. So, and there's even a drawing, I shouldn't say this, but there's even a drawing by Scarfe, that shows an airplane coming in, like that. But I'd say, although drawings by Scarfe, the concept is definitely Mark's concept. And so I think it's a bit of a blur about I mean, the figures are definitely Gerald Scarf's figures, right? But how much Mark has manipulated them is another question.
So I would say, like, the stuff that I wanted to, with one exception, one question still remains open. Like, when you introduced Mark to your family, did you say, "Hey, I met an architect"? Because that means, like, okay, our daughter is an architect, that makes sense. I dated a guy who is doing Seville Expo 92, that makes sense in Spain. Or have you been on some, I date somebody who does the greatest temporary things in the world?
Oh, well, I introduced him as somebody I really liked and I was in love with, and it was becoming really important to me. So, yeah, in fact, I met Mark through work. I was in London working for Will Alsop. You may be aware of who Will was. And one of the engineers that was working with us in multiple competitions, because we did many, many competitions, invited me to a meeting to Fisher Park, where I met Mark and Jonathan, and they were doing the expo in Seville. Obviously, they needed some help with a Spanish client, and they offered me to work with them for 6 months, which I accepted, and that was it. That was the beginning of our relationship.
Of a great love and a great cooperation, as we see by the pictures the two of you have picked up and show us at the walls over there. I thank you very much for the moment, but only for the moment, because I open up to the audience, and I believe we have got the first question, if I see correctly, from your end.
Can I just say something before?
Yeah.
Just to explain how we do it. Because we're streaming this live, if you have a question, kindly come up to the stage so that the camera can pick you up. And also, if you're watching on Zoom, and you have a question, let me know via the chat function. The chat function you find at the bottom of your window. Christine, did you have a question? Yes.
I only have to come up when you ask my question. Yeah?
Yes, exactly. Okay. That's the only thing you have.
Good. So, and in this direction. Actually, Neil, I have a question to you, and finally to all of you. You talked about Schinkel. And you know, but it's not so well known, there's a wonderful book of Kurt Forster, who first time did a monography on the Schinkel stage design, what not so many know. And I am asking me and you how it comes that stage design, what your husband did is stage design in the wonderful and gigantic way, is not accepted or they're not seen as art. Only to add what I did some years ago when I was director of the museum in the Netherlands, I did a book and everybody said, why do you do it? It was the art of architecture exhibitions. Even that is an issue, but much more. Is it? You said you are a design historian, right? Yeah. You should fight for that.
Yeah, we have.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Christine. Well, yeah, I think it's interesting because even Mark had to fight that, didn't he? He had to fight the idea that he may have been an architect, but this wasn't architecture, right? But I think times are changing because, you know, it's. I mean, think about architects do furniture designs. You know, you can just do a whole book on, you know, Frank Gehry's furniture designs, couldn't you, for example, or Schinkel's furniture designs. So it falls into the same category. And there is a great prejudice, mainly, I'd say, amongst architects themselves. The general public is a little bit more forgiving, I think. But architecture has, it is transforming the idea of what architecture is. And I think Mark was one who helped change that idea, you know, being an architect himself. So if you look at his structures on stage, they are structures. You know, they are definitely structure, how things are put together. And they're more than engineering because, you know, there's the argument that a building is no more than a decorated shed or a decorated piece of of engineering on the outside, and that's exactly what his was, highly decorated.
Yeah, and there's a video in the exhibition that I would encourage you to watch, that when Mark received his art DA at the Royal Society of Art in London, he gave a lecture. The lecture is actually really relevant because it's himself explaining the history of the gig, the history of the music, and he actually explains that very well. At the beginning, there was very little more than just scaffolding, basically, and a sound tower and a lighting tower. And as I think his capacity to transform that is due to the fact that he was an architect, because he understood how to actually make the next step that could actually bring the
yes, it's not like traditional stage design where you have a backdrop and maybe some side drops as well, and then maybe if there's something like the Zauberflaute, there's a balloon coming down or something, in the production. I mean, it's a real three-dimensional element, and at such scale as well, because it had to be seen by people at the back of huge stadiums and arenas, or at Potsdamer Platz in the same way. So it's about scale as well, I think.
It's the next step after opera. So opera already was kind of this really strong thing where music, architecture, arts come together in one piece that can be extremely impressive. And it's nearly the next step, because an opera still is bound to the location it is in, and which is limited by the limitation that's there. And suddenly what Mark was building he was nearly building also the cathedral for the thing that is happening there.
Yeah, and it's portable architecture as well. It's, just like his inflatables were portable, except for now he's doing it in metal mainly as well. So it's quite extraordinary. It all had to fit in a box at the end of the day, so that hundreds of trucks could move them around. And for some of those shows, there was two sets going around, so they could be set up in one city or the next. So there was hundreds of.
That's Mark Lieberberg, a German impresario, tour booker, once said, "I love and hate this guy." It was about Mark, because he loved him because, of course, what he was producing became so much more fantastic. He hated it because he had to care about all the logistics behind it, which suddenly to have got a stage, the claw of U2, with the weight of 200 tons. Is something that is kind of difficult for somebody who is responsible for the tour.
Does the big book exist on Mark Fisher, besides the catalog?
There are a couple of publications, not very big. They're like, what is by Southern Light. The other one is Real Stages, but that's the only two. Now there is a new architectural design magazine coming specifically about stewfish, and part of that relates to Mark, of course.
Michael, you were coming up.
Just one remark concerning stage design. When we go back into history and compare the things that happens in the field of opera, and we remember, for example, the famous film made by Milos Forman on Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Amadeus, he tried to reproduce the settings, and it was really impressive. Don Giovanni with Paper Wall and the Horseman, etc. But I think when we compare the different musical worlds, then popular music technology is right from the beginning a part of the music itself, and this is a difference compared to opera. Opera, we have much more traditional techniques, and the tradition is, yes, it has a different tradition, but technology belongs to the definition of popular music, and that's why I think it's quite consequent also to transform this idea or to show this idea and include it on stage.
So I'm looking into faces that are pretty open and still interested, and of course thinking about clever questions to ask us.
If you don't want to come up on stage, you can also ask your question from your seats, if that's more comfortable, like I'm doing now, so you can only hear my voice and can't see me, so there's no shame in that.
We have got at the very back.
Thank you for an absolutely incredible exhibition, and I mean, to see Mark's drawings in real life, you really get a sense of how a person thinks. So congratulations to everybody who's put that together. My reflection, and I hope it's a question, is, you know, I'm an architect who was inspired from film. So, you know, I think there's a cyclic relationship of how you arrive at a training and a profession. And when I was growing up in the Bartlett, down the road from the Architecture Association, and people like Mark Fisher were inspired, you know, doing incredibly inspiring work for a lot of us. A lot of the more conventional architecture schools had, quite right, they were insistent that this wasn't architecture. It wasn't serious enough. Even, you know, cinematography. For me, the films were, of course, Metropolis, Blade Runner. They're all related. And now there's a new generation of architects that refer to Christopher Nolan and Nathan Crowley's work. Fortunately, I think there is a lot of recognition in film architecture. Maybe not amongst the architecture community, but there's a, you know, hugely passionate side. So really, if it would be a question, I would say, you know, do you feel it really is underestimated? It's not just, you know, Pink Floyd The Wall was music, performance, and very significantly a film. So I think all of these are extremely interrelated, and I'm very joyful that I think it's a very timely exhibition that, you know, somebody like Mark Fisher, who's an absolute pioneer in what he achieved throughout his career, is an inspiration to actually a lot of us who really believe that architecture has to have another way. There's bigger innovation in film in architecture than there is in the construction industry. The construction industry has become assembling pre-manufactured components. And I think somebody like Mark, who invented technique, you know, and took risk, which we just can't do in the construction industry. So I'm not sure that there is a question in there somewhere, but first and foremost, I want to thank you very much for a very timely exhibition.
Yeah, well, yeah, you're absolutely correct. It's like I said earlier, there's so much doubt about whether this is real architecture or not. So, and I think times are changing. I mean, times are changing. I mean, exhibitions like this and the book, and hopefully there'll be a large work on more of Mark's drawings and photographs of his work come out. It's these pieces that will change people's minds. These are the things the students will look at and see it as architecture. So.
But this question is also like, don't we need much more people like Mark simply building and trying the dream to move the ideas of the people? It's a bit like what you often see in films. A lot of things that we learned in science fiction suddenly become reality and look even similar. Just remember Star Trek and this machine they go that opened up and you suddenly could speak to somebody. It was later built as Motorola handy, so Motorola cell phone. So things become reality that are simply art and fantasy. Don't we need much more Marks out there?
Yeah, Blade Runner, for example, really was influential on Mark as well. But a whole generation is not only Mark as well. You know, it was on me as well. Star Trek, I'm a Trekkie, and I actually, you know, I actually have a.
I don't know, perhaps in future all these huge productions will meet huge criticism, I guess, because of ecological reasons. We know that such concerts, they need a lot of energy, and at least in the world of academia, I see a certain trend that people argue against the huge events. we will see.
Just to answer this question, to answer quickly, I think like yes and no. You will have good alternatives and you will have good hybrid forms, I believe. But still, people, maybe I'm too conservative there, but real people coming together at a real place is something special where I don't have got the imagination that this ever will dismiss. Even if so, you wouldn't now turn back from Zoom meetings to normal meetings. Why should we if we don't have got the desire to be with other people in one room? And if it comes to art and a celebration like a tribal gathering, of course you have to be there. But there is a question. Then I take this question is like that I understand from you and Michael. What would Mark have felt about this? Like saying, like, for example, if suddenly somebody would have contacted him saying, like, "Hey, I'm now doing just virtual event. Could you give me the virtual stage, the virtual thing, where people can move in?"
Well, it's interesting because Jean-Michel Jarre last night brought along with him his digital man who's just done his latest video, and he was telling me last night that it's all going to be, you know, we put on our masks and all that. So it's being done. So would Mark have done it?
And I think, yeah, I think he probably would have been a very big part of it. You know, he knew how to find the people who would help actually to develop all this technology. And in fact, that's what I think it was his main skill, and where the his Da Vinci part laid. Basically, he was always pushing for new ideas, new technology. In fact, all the LED technology, I think, and the rapid way in which the small screen turned into a very big screen came from the music industry. And
he was doing the U2 tour. Was
for the
Suruba?
Potsdamer tour, yeah.
Potsdamer was the biggest LED ever produced at that time.
Yes, and at that point it was just by separating the pixels and making because they worked it out. People are very far. We can separate the pixels. The image still will be there. I mean, now it was incredibly expensive, you know, to use an LED machine. So yeah, I think that he will really be enjoying it, I think. And in fact, I think there was when the COVID started, STUFIS was, of course, suffering a lot from it, like everybody else, but especially in this industry because nobody was doing anything. And slowly, it's actually changing, and they're getting really busy because everybody wants to come out again, right? This is what you're saying. I think there's nothing compared with the interaction with another human being. In a stadium or in an arena. So
there was a question before. Yeah, but actually the lady with the white mask over there was.
Okay, only short. You talk about teaching and university where you are. We have, you can study architecture, you can study design, you can study art. Can you study stage design? Where? I never actually.
There's schools of there's schools of architecture that have special.
Yeah, also it's part of the art study, or it's separate.
Oh, Susanna, yeah. I know Susanna. Susanna was Mark's student.
First, I wanted to answer your question that at the University of, the Technical University of Berlin, they have also a stage design course. They actually, yes, as a separate subject. Yeah. It's less that I got a question. It's more that now I get emotional.
It's not really a question, but I just wanted to say something where in my design tutor in architecture hat. I taught in the Bartlett for like a few years, and I think that it's really important to say that even though Mark was really sometimes skeptical about architectural education because he thought that it was a little bit stuffy and sometimes like, disregarded him or whatever, like he ended up producing an amount or a body of work that is really important for us as tutors, and we don't have it accessible. So I think that all I wanted to say is that his way of drawing conveys not just the technical resolution that we want students to kind of have in their mind when they are thinking about our proposal, but they are able to convey an atmosphere and what a design could actually feel like. That is something that for architectural education is really important because you don't get to build those buildings. You need to build them in the imagination of the tutors and in the imagination of everyone. And the work of Mark is able to do those things. He's able to kind of explain it, how you would do it, but also incite you about the kind of magic that the design can have. And I think that it's really important that we have those drawings available. So I know that, I know that Christina is looking into that, but it would be really important to have them even digitally available because sometimes I was lucky enough to having seen those drawings myself, and I was trying to explain to a student, like, oh, you should look at this Mark Fisher drawing where he's putting himself above, the room and so on and so forth, but I couldn't actually point him to the drawing itself. And I think it is really important that they are out there because it's a unique body of work.
It will happen, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, Mr. Tchoban.
Well, I didn't expect, frankly, to say anything because I am too long then. I think he is better. Because I can only to be thankful to you all, for all of things, to Christina and to you, Neil, of course, for your boss. I'm Mr. Renner for you also. But I think that is very, very important point what you discussed now the last 10 minutes. Because if you ask what kind of images are on the wall of our museum, is it an architecture? Yes, it is an architecture of the stage. That is stage design, what is designed on the museum as a drawings. They are not architects. They both are stage designers, is Gonzaga and Soleil. Gonzaga was one of scholarship of Antonio Bibiena, what is also stage design family. And for me personally, from the beginning, it was enormous big point to bring the stage design as a very important part of architecture, is a visionary part of architecture. And I'm very, very glad that after a very successful exhibition created by Nadezhda Bartels about expressionistic film architecture of 20s, 30s, fall of the 20s, we have now this as an amazing exhibition, because if you speak about roots to 20s, to constructivists, if you speak about Vesnin, Alexander Vesnin, or Exter, if you speak about classic samples like all family of Bibiena, from Ferdinando to Antonio, about scholarship of Bibiena and all Milano school, was established there, and then going to Russia, to the court of Catherine the Great. So we speak about stage design, stage architecture as a most important part of architectural drawing at all. So far I can be only thankful that this exhibition and this discussion about is it architecture, is it the real, that is a real architecture. That is a real visionary architecture, what we see now. I was enormously impressed about quality of drawings, as a big compliment. And I was very, very impressed about this relationship to the tradition of visionary drawings of past, what we see now in this exhibition. So far, I can only say it is amazing discussion for me. Is it an architecture? Is it a very important part of architecture? Maybe most important part. Thank you for it.
Sergei, please stay there, because I've got a question to you. While we're talking, and for people who don't know, Sergei Tchoban is a really well-known, a really successful architect, and of course, you following up the question that we got from the back from this gentleman saying, like, okay, you being now back in your 20s and you have to decide stage architecture or real architecture. Would you nowadays decide for stage?
You can imagine that the concurrence for stage design in my in yours age was so big that I couldn't imagine to go to stage design because the concurrence was, I think, 20 times bigger as a to real architecture. So I would never step into the stage design education if I would. It was a big jealousy dream to be there, and I'm glad in my modest practice that in the in the last years, I had a possibility to make some stage designs, and it's really not in, by far away not so great. The productions as by Mark Fisher, but still, and it is of course very important part. But I mean, even not stage design like a part of work, but stage design is a very, very important part of drawing, as an imaginary part of architecture. The architectural drawing became to be real status from stage design architecture, because the family of Bibiana was the first architectural drawing you somehow collect as architecture. You never understand that is a design of stage. These amazing perspectives of 1,000 columns are going in the very right way. How they designed, how they created, how they drawn. You cannot imagine today that somebody was so exact to do that, but it was made by hand. And I think the great level of what we see in this exhibition, absolutely close to what I've seen by classical art of stage design, that is the level we have to make here in the museum even much more often. We had some exhibitions like expressionist film, like anime. All of them were maybe more successful as a real architecture, because the people like to see this imaginary part of architectural thinking. But I think the level of Mark Fisher exhibition makes really another height in our program, so I can only thank for that.
I just want to say one thing. Why is stage design not architecture? And I think we have to look at what does it mean to be an architect. Is architecture only related to buildings and to the fact that you have to produce a set of drawings that are necessary for belief? I think to me, I always believe that a good architect is someone who understands space, and who creates space, yes, understands it, and also has the capacity to deal with another many disciplines, engineers, consultants of all kinds, politics. So in the music industry, there is a lot of that. And there are lots of people you have to deal with, you have a lot of coordination, there's a lot of drawing production that you have to produce. Why is that not architecture?
It is architecture, of course.
No, I'm not. You know, I'm just thinking aloud. I think being an architect is a lot more than just knowing how to draw and drawing only to produce certain amount of particular buildings, right? It's not about that. It's a lot more than that, I think.
Yes, of course, but it is another problem in our time, because you have stage designs are existing 10, 15 years, because production goes so long, and our buildings are existing 30 years. So it comes also more together from the temporal aspect, because if we have spoken for 100 years about buildings are standing 100 years, so now we see in the city all buildings from 80s we have demolished, we are against now, we have even to make the special program not to demolish them from the ecological aspects. But now this dividing between real architecture and not real architecture is never else, because the real architecture becomes to be very temporarily, and not temporary architecture becomes to be a real discussion about space, real searching of space. If you speak about exhibition designs, if you speak about expo designs, nowadays we have preparation for the next World Expo, where a lot of architects are making pavilions. They are existing 6 months. Of course, we are speaking about how to recycle them, but it is the same stage design as you like. And of course, the most important thing in the architecture is the searching of space. And the searching of space, printing in the drawings, is the most important aim of this museum. How to bring close to the people the art of thinking about architecture. Because if you have a normal guest, not architect, not art scientist, and you see the ready building, so the distance is enormous, the big. And if this guest, visitor looks at the drawing, maybe it is a bigger chance that he or she understands what architect means in this drawing to build them. That is the idea, to bring near to the people the thinking of architect. And architect, of course, it's a very wide position. It is stage design, it is exhibition design, it is all what design spaces.
With this big view on, and principal, thank you, Sergei, view on architect, I would love to close this here at this moment, because we started with a wonderful artist that we all adore, discussed his work, his times, the surrounding. We ended up with the future of architecture and the architectural idea in general, and I think this is a great thing to discuss with drinks out there, to celebrate great persons, to celebrate the great ideas, and to talk to all of our friends about what we experienced in this exposition, so to share it and to make it a big success that Mark and Tchoban Gallery deserves. Thank you so much for putting this together and having us. And I've been here on this stage, I believe something like 15 years ago. I love to come back in 15 years latest. Thank you very much.